Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. In this column, the writer, Happy Mon Jacob, evaluates the implications of the AUKUS grouping on the quadrilateral grouping and as well as on the strategic interests of India in the Indo-Pacific region. See, we have discussed in previous classes that the AUKUS is a recent initiative launched by Australia, United Kingdom, and the United States. It has been designed as a maritime security initiative and it will exclusively focus on the security interests of the Indo Pacific. This will further boost maritime security cooperation between these three countries. And under the initiative, the United States and the United Kingdom have agreed to help out Australia by transferring the technology of nuclear powered submarines. So, by looking at the objectives of the AUKUS, strategic experts are pointing out that this is a maritime security initiative that is aimed at countering Chinese aggression in the Indo Pacific. But two members of the AUKUS grouping are already part of a similar initiative known as the Quad or the Quadrilateral. The Quadrilateral is an informal diplomatic group which includes four like minded democracies which are equally concerned about the ongoing developments in the Indo Pacific. The members are United States, Japan, Australia, and India. The quadrilateral or the Quad grouping was proposed by Japan in order to maintain the free and open nature of the Indo Pacific. So, this objective of the Quad is clearly aimed at China's aggression in the Indo Pacific, where it is violating the rules based order and triggering maritime disputes in the South China Sea in direct violation of the UN clause or the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. In order to further its maritime claims, China has displayed a lot of military aggression in the South China Sea, and it has even threatened freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight by disrupting the rules based order that has been created by the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. But however, this grouping has always remained hesitant about giving it a military angle or a maritime security angle. Particularly, India and Australia in the past have been hesitant to give a military purpose to the quadrilateral. But interestingly, the same Quad members take part in a naval maritime security exercise known as the Malabar. But India has firmly rejected that the Malabar exercise is a part of the quadrilateral grouping. India has made attempts to keep the Quad separate from the Malabar exercise. This is largely because India is hesitant to give the Quad any military purpose, and this hesitancy of India stems from two factors. One is India's commitment to its principle of strategic autonomy. This is the foundational principle of Indian foreign policy, which has allowed India to maintain an independent foreign policy. And as per the principle, India has always stayed away from any military clubs or military alliances. Then the other factor causing hesitancy on India's part could be China. India, being an immediate neighbor of China, that too with a border dispute, has always been hesitant to turn the quadrilateral into a military alliance, which could possibly invite a retaliation from China. But the writer argues that this hesitancy of India and as well as the other Quad members to provide a strategic military purpose to the Quad is defeating the very purpose of this grouping, and it is also making the grouping irrelevant in the context of the Indo Pacific. The problem is that the Quad has even branched out into other areas such as economic cooperation, and as well as it is focusing on pandemic management and vaccine development. So the writer argues that this diversification of the Quad defeats its strategic purpose, which was essentially to counter Chinese aggression in the Indo Pacific by upholding the rules based order in order to maintain the Indo Pacific free and open. But by hesitating to give it a military angle, India is squandering an opportunity to counter China, according to the writer. The United States understands this hesitation on India's part, and this could probably be the reason why the US has motivated Australia to form another grouping known as the AUKUS with the United Kingdom. Now that these three countries have clearly given AUKUS a military purpose with specific strategies and objectives, this could end up making the quadrilateral irrelevant in the Indo-Pacific context. The writer points out that the Quad neither has a formal agreement, nor a secretariat, nor a clearly laid down set of objectives. The Quad members have just stated that their objective is to uphold the rules based order in the Indo Pacific and to ensure that the Indo Pacific remains free and open. This has always been an indirect message to China. The grouping has hesitated from directly referring to Chinese aggression, and even when China called the Quadrilateral as the Asian NATO, the Quad and members like India have repeatedly clarified that the grouping is not a military grouping. This is what explains India's attempts to disassociate the Malabar naval exercise from the Quad grouping. But according to the writer, the Chinese threat in the Indo-Pacific region is very real, and the biggest impact of this will be felt by India. According to the writer, India is not only losing economic influence in the Indo-Pacific, but it is also losing its diplomatic and military influence in the region. While we say that the Indo-Pacific region is of utmost importance to India, India is not matching up to these statements with concrete initiatives on the ground. According to the writer, if the Indo-Pacific was India's top priority, then India should have been a part of the RCEP Free Trade Agreement, which would have given it the much needed economic influence in the region. But India quit the RCEP negotiations based on domestic fears, and this has significantly cut India's economic and diplomatic influence in the region. So this projects an image to the other members of the Quad, such as US, Japan, and even to Australia, that India is not serious about countering the Chinese threat. So by failing to be a part of the military alliance under the Quad, and by diversifying the Quad into other areas like economic cooperation and vaccine development, the Quad grouping is losing its strategic relevance in the Indo-Pacific. And now that US and Australia are working with United Kingdom under the AUKUS to create a parallel military framework for the Indo-Pacific, India will stand to lose out, and the Quad could very well end up becoming a dead organization, according to the writer. Now let's look at an editorial from page number 6, which evaluates the impact of tropical cyclones on India. This editorial has been brought out in the context of Cyclone Gulab, which recently made landfall along the coastline of Andhra Pradesh and Odisha. This cyclone has brought some destruction to these states, and both loss of life and property has been reported. But fortunately for India, Cyclone Gulab was not as destructive as the other cyclones which have hit India's coastline in the recent past. Compared to Cyclone Yas, Tauktae, and Umphan, the impact of Cyclone Gulab was very limited. But however, this should not be a cause for complacency on India's part, because India's coastline and coastal areas are highly vulnerable to the impact of high-intensity cyclones, many of them which turn into super cyclones. See, the northern part of the Indian Ocean, which comprises of Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea, accounts for only a minority of the tropical cyclones in the world. It reports only around 7% of the tropical cyclones around the world. These cyclones form in the pre-monsoon season and as well as in the post-monsoon season. And even though the northern Indian Ocean accounts for fewer cyclones, these cyclones are highly destructive. Our traditional understanding was that Bay of Bengal is more notorious for high-intensity tropical cyclones as compared to the Arabian Sea. But recent evidence suggests that even in the Arabian Sea, high-intensity cyclones are forming of late as a direct result of climate change and global warming. The latest report, which was brought out by the IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, makes it very clear that the rising global temperatures and our inability to keep the rise in temperature to under 1.5 degrees Celsius will directly contribute to increasing frequency and magnitude of natural disasters and extreme weather events. High-intensity extreme weather events, such as tropical cyclones, they bring enormous destruction to coastal areas and coastal communities by not just leading to large-scale deaths, but also by destroying property, agricultural fields, and public infrastructure such as roads, railway networks, telephone lines, power lines, etc. So one such supercyclone is sufficient to set back a coastal area and to completely hamper its economic growth. So such destructive cyclones, they leave behind a long-term impact, and the editorial argues that the current disaster management framework that India has put in place is not sufficient to insulate our coastal communities from the long term impact of such disasters. See, over the last 15 to 16 years, India has done really well with regard to disaster management thanks to the Disaster Management Act of 2005. This act finally created an institutional architecture to deal with disaster management and provided for a proactive response. So accordingly, institutions such as the National Disaster Management Authority has come up at the national level, and similar state level and district level institutions have also been created. The administrative machinery has become more proactive to contain the impact of disaster, and India has made a lot of progress with regard to forecasting technology, early warnings, emergency relief, evacuation, rescue, etc. But however, the editorial points out, most of these are short-term measures. They largely help in dealing with the immediate impact of such a disaster. But for containing the long-term impact, what we need is a clear-cut focus on rehabilitation, compensation, and insurance. While India's disaster management framework provides for these provisions, there is still a huge shortcoming when it comes to its implementation. If you look at several natural disasters that India has suffered from in the recent years, you will notice that India's short-term to medium-term response has been excellent, but after a few weeks, the long-term measures are forgotten, and the worst part is that rehabilitation and compensation schemes are hit by massive corruption at the national, state, and district level. So, in this context, the editorial is asking India to create a social safety net to mitigate the long term impact of such disasters, such as tropical cyclones, in order to shield and protect the coastal areas and the coastal communities from the increasing threat posed by extreme weather events, which is a direct result of climate change and global warming. The editorial is calling for institutional measures that can guarantee financial protection to the affected communities in order to provide for their long term recovery and rehabilitation. Next, on page number 6, we have another editorial that evaluates the Prime Minister's speech at the UN General Assembly. See, every year in the month of September, the UN General Assembly Summit is held where world leaders get together and address the gathering to highlight global issues. In the past, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has addressed the UNGA on several such occasions, and recently as well, he took the opportunity to address the UNGA to highlight the key issues that are affecting India and the world. First, the Prime Minister spoke about the massive progress that India has achieved in the recent years. He spoke about India's progress in the field of poverty alleviation. He highlighted India's efforts in combating the COVID-19 pandemic and how India has emerged as a leader with regard to pharmaceuticals and vaccine manufacturing. The Prime Minister even highlighted India's remarkable progress with regard to the adoption of clean and renewable forms of energy and how India is already in line to achieve its Paris targets. Under the Paris Agreement of the Climate Change Convention, India has committed to achieve an installed capacity of 450 gigawatts of clean and renewable energy by the year 2030. According to several reports, India is already very close to achieving this target, and hence the Prime Minister has highlighted this achievement of India to showcase India's commitment towards tackling climate change. He even spoke about the tremendous socio-economic progress that India has seen, which is based on an inclusive model of development. He spoke about how millions of Indians today are able to access water, banking services, insurance, health services, etc., thereby highlighting the political achievements of his government. Then after that, the Prime Minister trained his guns on India's primary rivals in the region, that is Pakistan and China. With regard to Pakistan, he made pointed references towards Pakistan's state sponsorship of terrorism in the region and even linked the current situation in Afghanistan caused by the Taliban takeover to Pakistan's sponsorship of radicalism and extremism in the region. After bringing out these regional and global security threats, the Prime Minister even made indirect references to China and to its increasingly aggressive behavior in the maritime domain. The Prime Minister made references to maritime disputes in the Indo Pacific region and criticized countries which are challenging and violating the rules based order. The Prime Minister even called for honest investigations into the origins of the pandemic, which has often been a sensitive topic for China. Then, after this focus on India's strategic concerns, the Prime Minister targeted the UN itself for its failure to initiate UN reforms, which has been a long standing demand of India, as India considers the United Nations to be an outdated organization. India is actively seeking the expansion of the UN Security Council, and it is eager to become a permanent member of the Security Council to not just represent the interests of India, but also to play a key role in global affairs. Following this push for UN reforms, the Prime Minister even mounted a strong defense of the Indian democracy, which has of late come under a lot of criticism by the Western countries. Even during the Prime Minister's visit to the US President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris directly highlighted the weakening democratic traditions of India under the current government. In the last few years, India has been facing strong criticism from the West for rising authoritarianism, communalism, and majoritarian politics. For example, the rising incidents of mob violence and communal violence in the country has come under criticism. And the way in which the government has targeted social activists has also been heavily criticized by the Western governments. In this regard, US President and Vice President took the opportunity to remind the Prime Minister that India has an urgent need to strengthen its democracy. In response to these statements, Prime Minister Modi used the UN platform to highlight that India is the mother of democracies and strongly defended the inclusive principles of the Indian democracy. He pointed out to the UN that India is a symbol of diversity and pluralism, and that the Indian society is inherently inclusive and equal. So the editorial praises the Prime Minister for doing well to committing India to its democratic traditions, but it hopes that these commitments will be followed and implemented in letter and spirit. Now let's take up a column from page number 7, which evaluates the implementation of the PM Kusum scheme and the challenges being faced in its implementation. See, this scheme falls under the purview of the Ministry of Power and New and Renewable Energy, and it was launched in 2019, and its timeline is supposed to expire in 2022. This scheme was launched by the Government of India to help the farmers adopt solar power in their agricultural farms, mainly to power the water pumps for irrigation. The primary objective of PM Kusum is to promote the adoption of solar powered pumps, which will not only bring financial benefits for the farmers, but will also help in reducing the power subsidies given by the government for irrigation, and it will also help in decarbonizing our agriculture, as regular water pumps used in irrigation largely rely upon dirty and non-renewable forms of energy. So with these objectives in mind, the central government launched the PM Kusum scheme, but however, its implementation has been hampered. According to the writers, the challenges created by the pandemic, the inefficiencies of our state governments in implementation, and the practical challenges being faced on the ground, they are the primary reasons behind the poor implementation of this scheme. See, under the scheme, there are three types of deployment models proposed for encouraging the deployment of solar powered pumps in agricultural farms. The first model is based on off-grid pumps. This includes decentralized solar plants in each individual farm, which powers the solar pump, and these plants are not connected to the electricity grid. The second model is based on solarized agriculture feeders, and the third model is based on grid-connected solar pumps. For these two models, greater support is needed, that is, infrastructure support is needed from the government and from the distribution companies or the DISCOMs. But when it comes to off-grid pumps, farmers can take them up on their own, as this model is independent and decentralized. Under the scheme, off-grid pumps have become very popular, and several lakh off-grid pumps have already been installed. But however, it falls short of the target of achieving 2 million installed off-grid pumps by 2022. The main barrier in the implementation of off-grid pumps is the lack of awareness amongst farmers and as well as their inability to bear the cost in the installation of these solar pumps. Compared to the first model, the other two models have largely failed, mainly due to regulatory, operational, financial, and technical challenges which have not been addressed by the state governments and the distribution companies. So, in order to overcome these challenges and to ensure the success of this ambitious scheme, the writers suggest a 5-step solution. First, the writers are calling for extending the timeline of the scheme so that the discoms have enough time to plan for the procurement of solar power generated by the farmers. Currently, discoms are not so interested in purchasing the surplus electricity generated by the farmers when they are installing grid connected pumps, because discoms would have already drawn their plans for procurement. So if the scheme's timeline is extended, then discoms will get enough time to plan accordingly for the procurement of surplus electricity from the grid connected solar pumps. Their second suggestion is to provide a level playing field for the distributed solar plants under the off-grid model. The writers are pointing out that discoms don't generally encourage the distributed model for solar power plants. They generally prefer procurement from centralized plants due to cost advantages and tax benefits. So there is an inherent bias in the system which encourages the discoms to procure electricity from centralized generators, and they have no incentive to procure from distributed solar plants. Hence, the writers are calling upon the government to create a level playing field by removing these biases which work against the interests of off-grid pumps. Third, they call upon the government to streamline land regulations and ensure greater interdepartmental coordination in order to help the farmers to convert their agricultural land for non-agricultural purposes, such as solar power generation, which is needed under this scheme. Because under the scheme, the farmers can sell the surplus back into the grid, which also helps them in generating additional income. But they're facing challenges with regard to land regulations, and hence streamlining them will help the farmers to adopt grid connected solar pumps under the scheme. Next, to overcome the barrier of higher cost being faced by the farmers, the writers suggest that the government should work out an innovative financing mechanism through which easier and cheaper credit and loans are provided to farmers to encourage them to adopt this model of solar power generation. And finally, the writers are calling upon the government to push grid connected pumps, which currently are lagging behind, mainly due to the distrust between the farmers and the distribution companies. Because if discoms have to purchase the surplus electricity from the farmers, there is a need for an accounting system. So this calls for a metering system and transformers which can provide the required infrastructure for such accounting. So the writers are calling upon the government to focus on implementing smart metering and installing smart transformers, which will help the distribution companies to procure electricity from the farmers by creating a trust-based relationship between the two entities. According to the writers, if these solutions are implemented, it will go a long way in ensuring the success of the PM Kusum scheme, which will not only enable solar powered irrigation for farmers and reduce their costs, but it will also reduce the burden of power subsidies on the government and will also help in decarbonizing our agriculture. Now let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question: the Quad has too many items on its agenda and with the announcement of AUKUS faces the danger of becoming a talk shop. Critically examine. The second question: India must create a social safety net to manage the fallout of cyclonic storms. Discuss. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which the link shall be shared in the description box below. So this concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.